She placed the wallet gently on the table, her hand steady despite the storm brewing in her manager's eyes. 5 minutes later, everything she thought she knew about justice, love, and her own worth would be rewritten by the man walking through that door. The fluorescent lights above Rose's diner buzzed with the same tired energy that Zara Williams carried in her bones after pulling another double shift. At 28, she moved through the cramped restaurant with practiced efficiency, her black sneakers silent against the worn linoleum, balancing 3 plates on one arm while mentally calculating if tonight's tips would cover both her mother's medication and her community college textbook. The dinner rush had finally ebbed, leaving only the lingering scent of grease and coffee, punctuated by the occasional clink of silverware against ceramic. Zara wiped down table 6 for the 3rd time, her movements automatic, her mind elsewhere, on the medical billing certificate program she'd been taking night classes for, on the dreams she'd carefully folded away like old photographs. "Order up," barked Tommy, the head cook, sliding a plate of meatloaf across the pass-through window. His weathered face softened when he caught Zara's eye. "You doing all right, Zed? You look beat." "I'm fine, Tommy." She managed a smile, the kind she'd perfected over years of service. Warm enough to earn decent tips, guarded enough to protect what little dignity remained after being overlooked, underpaid, and occasionally worse. "Just thinking about Mom's appointment tomorrow." The bell above the entrance chimed, and Zara straightened, smoothing her uniform apron. But it wasn't a customer. It was Derek Martinez, the night manager, strutting in with his usual air of self-importance. At 35, Derek had the swagger of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered, his slicked-back hair and too-tight polo shirt screaming insecurity masked as authority. Derek's eyes swept the dining room like a predator surveying territory. When his gaze landed on Zara, something cold flickered there, the same look she'd seen countless times before, the one that said she didn't belong, would never belong, no matter how hard she worked or how perfectly she smiled. "Williams," Derek's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "Table 12 needs attention. And when you're done with that, the bathrooms could use a deep clean." Zara bit back her response. She'd already cleaned those bathrooms twice today, but arguing with Derek was like trying to hold water in her bare hands, futile and guaranteed to leave her worse off than when she started. What would you do if you were constantly treated unfairly at work? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes we all need to hear we're not alone in these struggles. Meanwhile, across the city in a glass tower that pierced the skyline like a silver needle, David Chen sat alone in his corner office, staring at the city lights below. At 32, he commanded a tech empire worth billions, but tonight the numbers on his laptop screen blurred together like distant stars. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window showed a man who had everything: tailored suits, a Harvard MBA, a penthouse that magazines called architectural poetry, and somehow still felt hollow. David's phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. Another text from his assistant about tomorrow's board meeting, another reminder of the carefully orchestrated life that had brought him everything except the one thing money couldn't buy: genuine connection. His last relationship had ended when he discovered she'd been secretly photographing his private spaces for a gossip blog. Before that, there had been others, beautiful, ambitious women who saw his bank account before they ever saw him. He loosened his tie, the silk sliding through his fingers like water. Outside, the city hummed with life, millions of people loving, laughing, struggling, dreaming, while he sat trapped in a tower of his own making, successful beyond measure and lonelier than he'd ever been as a scholarship kid from Queens. David's eyes fell on the framed photograph on his desk, his parents on their wedding day, his father in a borrowed suit, his mother in a simple white dress from a thrift store. They'd had nothing but each other and somehow built a love story that lasted 35 years until cancer took his mother last spring. His father's words from the funeral echoed in his mind: "Money can't buy you a heart that beats for someone else, son. Don't forget that in all your success." He hadn't forgotten. He'd simply stopped believing it was possible for someone like him, someone whose worth was measured in stock prices and quarterly reports, someone whose every move was scrutinized by boardrooms and media outlets alike. Back at Rose's diner, Zara was clearing the last table when she noticed it, a black leather wallet, thin and expensive-looking, tucked between the salt shaker and the wall. Her heart skipped. In her 5 years at Rose's, she'd found everything from car keys to wedding rings left behind by distracted customers. Each time, she turned the items in to Derek or old Rosie herself, never thinking twice about it. But Derek wasn't someone she trusted with anything valuable, and Rosie had gone home hours ago. Zara picked up the wallet, feeling the quality of the leather beneath her fingertips. It was the kind of wallet that cost more than she made in a month. Inside, she found a driver's license, David Chen, with an address in the most expensive part of the city, along with several credit cards and what looked like several $100s in cash. She could walk away. Pretend she never saw it. The money alone would solve her immediate problems, her mother's medical bills, her textbook, maybe even enough left over for a decent pair of work shoes that wouldn't leave her feet aching by the end of her shift. But as she stared at the driver's license photo, a handsome man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, she thought about her mother's voice from childhood. Baby girl, integrity isn't about doing right when people are watching. It's about who you are when nobody's looking but God. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Zara tucked the wallet into her apron pocket and approached the hostess stand where Derek was counting the night's receipts, his thick fingers moving across the bills with practiced greed. The diner felt different now, smaller somehow, as if the walls were pressing in around her. The overhead lights seemed harsher, casting sharp shadows that made Derek's angular face look even more predatory. "Derek," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ancient refrigeration units. "Someone left this at table 12. She placed the wallet on the scratched laminate counter between them, her hand lingering for just a moment before pulling away. The leather seemed to gleam under the fluorescent lights, its quality obvious even in the harsh artificial glow. Derek's eyes locked onto the wallet immediately, his pupils dilating slightly as he took in its obvious value. When he looked back at Zara, something had shifted in his expression, a hunger that made her skin crawl. "Well, well," Derek said, his voice taking on that oily tone she'd learned to fear. "Look what we have here." He picked up the wallet, turning it over in his hands like a jeweler examining a precious stone. "This is expensive stuff, Williams. Real expensive." "The ID says David Chen," Zara offered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Maybe we could call." "Call?" Derek's laugh was sharp, mirthless. "Oh, we're gonna call all right. We're gonna call the police." The words hit Zara like ice water. "What? Why would we?" "Because," Derek stepped closer, his cologne mixing with the lingering smell of fryer oil in a nauseating cocktail, "I just watched you take this wallet out of your apron pocket. Been watching you for the last 10 minutes, actually, wondering what you were up to back there. I found it at table 12. I was bringing it to you." Her voice cracked slightly, the injustice of it stealing her breath. Derek opened the wallet, his eyebrows raising theatrically as he counted the bills inside. $347. Plus these credit cards. He looked up at her with mock concern. "That's grand theft, Williams. That's jail time. You know that's not what happened." The words came out stronger than she felt, but her hands were trembling now, betraying her fear. "What I know," Derek said, his voice rising loud enough that Tommy poked his head out from the kitchen, concern creasing his weathered face, "is that I caught one of my employees with a customer's wallet full of cash. What I know is that people like you think you can just take whatever you want and play innocent when you get caught. People like you." The phrase hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Zara felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, exactly, but something deeper. Her faith in fairness, maybe. Her belief that doing the right thing mattered. "Derek, please." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "You know me. I've worked here for 5 years. I've never." 5 years of casing the place, you mean? 5 years of watching, waiting for the right opportunity. Derek was enjoying this now. She could see it in the way his chest puffed out, the way his voice carried across the empty diner. "Tommy, come witness this." Tommy emerged from the kitchen fully, his lined face creased with confusion and growing anger. At 62, he'd worked in restaurants his entire life and had seen every kind of person pass through their doors. He looked from Derek to Zara, taking in her trembling hands, her wide eyes. "What's going on here?" Tommy's voice was carefully neutral, but Zara caught the protective edge underneath. "Caught Williams red-handed with a customer's wallet," Derek announced, holding up the leather billfold like evidence in a courtroom. $347 and credit cards. She had it hidden in her apron. "That's not, I found it and brought it to him immediately," Zara said, turning to Tommy with pleading eyes. "You know I would never." "What I know," Tommy said slowly, his gaze fixed on Derek, "is that Zara's been nothing but honest in all the time I've known her. Girl returned $20, I overpaid her just last week." Derek's jaw tightened. "Well, maybe you don't know her as well as you think you do, old man. Maybe none of us do." The accusation hung heavy in the recycled air of the diner. Zara felt the walls closing in, felt the weight of generations of suspicion and prejudice settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. This was how it happened, she realized. This was how dreams died, not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in small, ugly encounters in fluorescent-lit diners where doing the right thing got you branded a criminal. "I'm calling the police," Derek announced, reaching for his phone. "And you're fired, Williams. Effective immediately. Security risk." "Derek, wait," Tommy started. "No." Derek's voice cut through the air like a whip. "This is my shift, my responsibility. I won't have thieves working under me." Zara untied her apron with numb fingers, the fabric heavy with the weight of failed dreams. Her community college textbook would have to wait. Her mother's medication, she couldn't think about that right now. She folded the apron carefully, her movements deliberate and dignified despite the chaos in her chest. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, looking Derek straight in the eye, "I hope someday you learn the difference between justice and cruelty." She turned toward the door, her vision blurring slightly. Behind her, she could hear Tommy arguing with Derek, his voice rising in defense of her character, but it felt distant now, like voices from another room. The evening air hit her face as she pushed through the glass door, cool and sharp with the promise of autumn. She had made it exactly 3 steps toward the bus stop when she heard the rumble of an expensive engine and the soft hiss of hydraulic brakes. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb, its paint job so perfect it seemed to absorb the streetlight rather than reflect it. The rear window rolled down with a nearly silent whisper, revealing a man in an expensive suit, his dark hair slightly disheveled, his eyes scanning the diner's windows with obvious concern. David Chen stepped out of the car with fluid grace, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the pavement. Even in the harsh glow of the streetlights, Zara could see the worry etched across his features, the way his hand instinctively went to his jacket pocket where his wallet should have been. Their eyes met across the sidewalk, his confused and slightly panicked, hers red-rimmed with unshed tears and burning with injustice. In that moment, neither of them knew that everything was about to change. Neither of them knew that justice was about to walk through the door of Rose's diner in a $1,000 suit, carrying the power to rewrite both their stories in ways they couldn't yet imagine. David's brow furrowed as he took in Zara's appearance, the rumpled uniform, the defeated slump of her shoulders, the way she clutched her purse like a shield against the world. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle but urgent. "I think I might have left my wallet inside. Black leather, about this size." He held up his hands to demonstrate. Zara's breath caught in her throat. She looked back at the diner, where Derek was probably already spinning his story to the police, painting her as just another criminal who'd been caught in the act. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible above the distant traffic. "Yes, you did." And with those 3 words, the second act of both their lives was about to begin. David's relief was palpable as he moved toward the diner entrance, but Zara's voice stopped him cold. "Wait." The word came out sharper than she intended, heavy with exhaustion and something that might have been fear. "You need to know what you're walking into." He turned back to her, really looking this time. Under the amber streetlight, he could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the strap of her purse like it was anchoring her to the earth. Her uniform bore the name tag Zara, and there was something in her dark eyes that spoke of battles fought and lost. "I found your wallet," she continued, her voice steady despite the storm raging beneath the surface. "I brought it to my manager. She paused, swallowing hard. "He accused me of stealing it. I just got fired." David's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching horror. "That's impossible. You're the one who. Doesn't matter what I did." Zara's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Matters what it looked like to him. What people like me always look like to people like him." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. David felt something twist in his chest, a recognition of a world he'd known existed but had never witnessed firsthand. His success had insulated him from these harsh realities, wrapped him in boardrooms and country clubs where discrimination was subtle, coded in language he'd learned to navigate but never experienced so brutally. "People like you," he repeated quietly. Zara studied his face, searching for something, mockery, disbelief, the kind of performative sympathy she'd learned to distrust. Instead, she found what looked like genuine confusion mixed with growing anger. It threw her off balance. "Look, Mr. Chen," she started. "You know my name. Your ID was in the wallet." She took a step back, suddenly aware of how this might look, her standing outside in the dark with a wealthy man's wallet while claiming innocence. Your manager's probably calling the police right now, so maybe you should just go in and... No. David's voice was firm, final. No, we're going in together. We're not doing anything together. The words came out faster than she meant them to, driven by years of learned caution. I don't know you. You don't know me. You get your wallet back, I go home and figure out how to explain to my mother why I lost another job. That's how this works. But even as she said it, she wasn't moving toward the bus stop. Something in his eyes, a kind of moral certainty she hadn't expected, kept her rooted to the spot. David ran a hand through his hair, his expensive watch catching the light. What's your manager's name? Derek Martinez. And he's not going to listen to reason, if that's what you're thinking. Men like Derek don't admit mistakes. They double down. Men like Derek, David repeated, testing the phrase. You seem to have a lot of categories for people. There was no judgment in his voice, just curiosity, but Zara bristled anyway. You live long enough getting sorted into categories yourself, you learn to recognize the sorting. Inside the diner, they could see Derek pacing behind the counter, his phone pressed to his ear. Tommy was nowhere to be seen, probably back in the kitchen, staying out of the drama. Through the windows, the scene looked almost theatrical under the harsh fluorescent lights. He's talking to the police, Zara observed, her voice hollow, telling them about the dangerous criminal who tried to steal from a customer. David watched Derek's animated gestures, the self-important way he held himself, and felt his anger crystallizing into something harder, colder. He'd built his empire by reading people, by understanding their motivations and weaknesses. Derek Martinez was an open book written in ugly, familiar handwriting. Has he done this before? David asked. Accused you of things? Zara hesitated. The answer was complicated, not theft, exactly, but 1,000 small humiliations, a pattern of suspicion and contempt that had worn her down like water on stone. How do you explain to someone who'd never experienced it the weight of constant surveillance, the exhaustion of always having to prove your honesty, your worth, your right to simply exist in spaces that others took for granted? It's not that simple, she said finally. Then make it simple for me. The request was gentle but persistent, and something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. David Chen was handsome in the way that money made men handsome, well-groomed, confident, carrying himself with the assurance of someone who'd never had to question his place in the world. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like hunger. Not for her specifically, she realized, but for truth. For understanding. You really want to know? She asked. I really want to know. Zara glanced back at the diner, where Derek had finished his phone call and was now watching them through the window with obvious suspicion. The sight of her talking to David would only confirm his worst assumptions about her character. Derek thinks people like me are naturally dishonest, she said quietly. Has since the day I started working here. Watches me closer than anyone else, questions every mistake, assumes the worst about every situation. Tonight was the first time he thought he had proof. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. People like you. Black. Poor. Desperate enough to work double shifts for tips that barely cover rent. She met his eyes directly. The kind of person who might steal a wallet if she thought she could get away with it. The honesty of it hit him like a physical blow. In his world, discrimination was subtle, the kind of thing discussed in diversity seminars and corporate policies. This was rawer, more immediate. This was someone's life being destroyed by assumptions and prejudice while he stood watching. And you brought the wallet to him anyway, David said. Knowing what he thought of you. Because it was the right thing to do. Her voice was quiet but fierce. Because my mama raised me better than that, and because I have to be able to look at myself in the mirror. David nodded slowly, understanding clicking into place. Even though you knew he might not believe you. Especially because I knew he might not believe you. She corrected him. When you're already guilty in someone's mind, the only choice you have is whether to be guilty of something you actually did. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. David realized he was seeing something he'd never witnessed before, the mathematics of integrity when the cost was everything you had. I'm going in there, he said finally. To get your wallet. To get you your job back. Zara shook her head immediately. No. No. You don't understand. This will make it worse. Derek will think I planned this somehow, that we're working together. He'll let me worry about Derek. You can't fix this. The words came out more desperate than she intended. You can't just walk in there and make this right because you have money. Some things don't work that way. David looked at her for a long moment, recognizing the fear beneath her resistance. Not fear of Derek, exactly, but fear of hope itself. Fear of believing that justice might actually exist for someone like her. Maybe not, he said quietly, but I have to try. Have you ever had to choose between staying quiet and standing up for what's right, even when it might make things worse? Tell us about a time when you had to decide whether to speak up or stay safe. Through the diner window, Derek had spotted them talking and was moving toward the door, his face twisted with suspicion and something that might have been panic. David's arrival was clearly not part of the script he'd written for this evening. His coming, Zara murmured, taking an instinctive step back. David stepped forward instead, positioning himself slightly in front of her, not protectively, exactly, but as a barrier between her and whatever was about to unfold. The gesture was small, almost unconscious, but Zara felt it like a shock of electricity. When was the last time someone had stood between her and trouble instead of pushing her toward it? The diner's door chimed as Derek emerged, his chest puffed out with false bravado, his eyes darting between David's expensive suit and Zara's defeated posture. Can I help you, sir? Derek's voice was syrupy with forced politeness, the tone he reserved for customers he assumed had money to spend. Actually, David said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard, I think you can. And Zara realized, with a mixture of terror and something that might have been hope, that there was no going back now. Whatever happened next would change everything, for better or for worse. Her quiet life of invisibility was about to end. Derek's smile was razor-thin as he sized up David, his eyes automatically cataloging the expensive suit, the confident posture, the unmistakable aura of wealth. His entire demeanor shifted like a chameleon changing colors, the aggressive predator replaced by an obsequious servant. I'm Derek Martinez, night manager, he said, extending his hand. How can Rose's Diner serve you tonight, Mr. Chen? David Chen. David's handshake was firm but brief, his eyes already moving past Derek toward the diner's interior. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Derek's face lit up with practiced enthusiasm. Ah, you're here about the wallet. What a relief. I was just about to call the police about the theft. The theft? David's voice remained level, but Zara caught the subtle sharpening around his eyes. Terrible business, Derek continued, his voice taking on the conspiratorial tone of someone sharing gossip. Caught one of my employees red-handed with your wallet. Had it hidden in her apron. Can you believe that? Thank God I was watching, or who knows what might have happened to your money. David glanced at Zara, who had gone very still beside him. Her face was a mask of controlled emotion, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands had unconsciously formed fists at her sides. Hidden in her apron, David repeated slowly. That's right. Bold as brass, she was. These people, they think they're entitled to. Derek caught himself, his eyes flicking nervously to Zara. Well, you know how it is with employee theft. It's an epidemic in the service industry. The pause where Derek had almost revealed his true thoughts hung in the air like a toxic cloud. David felt something cold and sharp crystallize in his chest, not just anger, but disgust. He'd encountered Derek's type before in boardrooms and business meetings, people who smiled to your face while harboring rot in their hearts. I see, David said carefully. And where is this employee now? Fired her immediately, of course. Can't have criminals on the payroll. She's probably long gone by now. They usually run when they get caught. Actually, Zara spoke for the first time since Derek had emerged, her voice steady despite the tremor David could hear underneath. I'm right here. Derek's face flushed red as he spun to face her. What are you still doing here? I told you to leave. I was trying to leave, Zara replied evenly. But Mr. Chen arrived, and I thought he might want to know what actually happened. What actually happened, Derek sputtered, is that you stole from a customer and got caught. What actually happened, David interjected, his voice cutting through Derek's bluster like a blade, is that MS? Williams, Zara supplied quietly. Ms. Williams found my wallet and brought it to you immediately. Isn't that right, Ms. Williams? Derek's eyes darted between them, confusion and growing panic flickering across his features. Now wait just a minute. How do you know what she did? Were you two working together? Is this some kind of... I know, David said, his voice dangerously quiet, because she just told me. Outside. Where she was explaining why she'd been fired for doing exactly what any honest person would do. The color drained from Derek's face. She's lying. Obviously she's lying. Why would you believe her over me? David stepped closer to Derek, not threateningly, but with the presence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. Why would she lie about something that makes her look bad? If she were going to lie, don't you think she'd come up with a story that didn't involve her getting fired? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Here's what I think happened, David continued, his voice still calm but carrying an undertone of steel. I think Ms. Williams found my wallet, brought it to you immediately, and you saw an opportunity. Maybe you figured you could pocket the cash yourself and blame her. Maybe you just saw a chance to flex your power over someone you thought couldn't fight back. Either way, you decided to destroy someone's livelihood rather than simply say thank you. That's not, I would never. Derek was backing toward the diner now, his bravado crumbling like wet cardboard. Wouldn't you? David's question was surgical in its precision. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just tried to convince me that the woman who returned my wallet was the same woman who stole it. That's either incompetence or malice. Derek. Which is it? Tommy had emerged from the kitchen during the confrontation, drawn by the raised voices. He stood in the doorway, his weathered face grim as he took in the scene. Derek backed against the diner's entrance, David radiating controlled fury, and Zara standing slightly apart, watching it all unfold with the expression of someone who'd learned not to hope for justice. Everything all right out here? Tommy asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Just fine, Derek said quickly. Just a misunderstanding. Mr. Chen, if you'll just come inside, I'll get your wallet for you and we can. Oh, we're all going inside, David said. Ms. Williams, Tommy, I assume you're Tommy. I'd like all of you to hear what I have to say. Derek looked like he might be sick. That's really not necessary. I think it is. The diner's interior felt smaller with all four of them crowded into the main dining area. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher, throwing everything into sharp relief. The cracked vinyl seats, the stained Formica countertops, the years of accumulated hopes and disappointments that seemed to cling to every surface. Derek moved behind the counter like it was a fortress, his hand shaking slightly as he retrieved the wallet from where he'd placed it beside the register. Here you go, Mr. Chen. All intact, as you can see. No harm done. David accepted the wallet but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he looked around the diner, taking in the faded photographs on the walls, the handwritten specials board, the honest where that spoke of a family business struggling to survive. This is your place, he asked Tommy. Me and my wife Rose started it 32 years ago, Tommy replied, pride and worry warring in his voice. She passed 2 years back. It's just me now. David nodded, understanding passing between the two men. And Derek works for you. Derek's my night manager, Tommy said carefully, his eyes flicking to Derek's increasingly panicked face. Has been for about 6 months now. I see. David opened his wallet now, checking its contents. Everything was there, the cash, the credit cards, even the business cards he'd collected at yesterday's conference. $347, he said quietly. That's what you said, wasn't it, Derek? Derek's face went grey. How did you? Because you counted it. In front of witnesses. David's voice was still calm, but there was something implacable in it now, like a glacier advancing. Which means you opened my wallet. Which means you handled my personal property without my permission. Which means... He let the sentence hang, watching Derek's face crumble as the implications sank in. Zara found herself holding her breath, afraid to believe what she was seeing. Men like Derek didn't get held accountable. They never got held accountable. But here's the thing, Derek, David continued, his voice almost conversational now. I don't really care about the privacy violation. I don't care that you counted my money. What I care about is that you were so eager to destroy someone's life that you didn't even wait to hear my side of the story. I was protecting your interests, Derek started desperately. No, David cut him off. You were protecting your own interests. Your need to feel powerful over someone you thought couldn't fight back. Tommy was watching this exchange with growing understanding and barely contained anger. Derek, he said slowly, did you fire Zara for returning a customer's wallet? She had it hidden, Derek began. Did you fire Zara for returning a customer's wallet? Tommy repeated, his voice harder now. Derek's silence was answer enough. We've all seen situations where someone in power abuses it. What do you think should happen to people who destroy others' livelihoods out of prejudice? Share your thoughts on accountability below. Tommy turned to Zara, his face heavy with regret. Zara, honey, I am so sorry. If I had known. You couldn't have known, Zara said quietly, but there was something different in her voice now. Something that hadn't been there an hour ago. Hope, maybe. Or just the absence of defeat. David was watching her carefully, noting the subtle shift in her posture, the way she was standing straighter now. Ms. Williams, he said, I'd like to ask you something. She met his eyes, and for a moment the diner fell away around them. Yes. Would you be willing to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere considerably nicer than this. He paused, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I feel like I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you a proper thank you. The request hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Zara felt her heart skip, but also felt the familiar voice of caution whispering in her ear. Men like David Chen didn't date women like her. They thanked them, maybe compensated them, then went back to their real lives. I don't think that's necessary, she said carefully. Maybe not necessary, David agreed. But I'd like to. If you're willing. Before Zara could respond, Derek made one last desperate play for control. Now just wait a minute, he said, his voice rising with panic. You can't just waltz in here and... Actually, Tommy interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of 32 years of business ownership. Derek, you're fired. Effective immediately. You can't fire me. Derek sputtered. I was protecting the business. I was. You were about to get me sued, Tommy replied grimly. Wrongful termination, discrimination, maybe criminal charges depending on what lies you told the police. Get your things and get out. Derek looked around wildly, searching for allies, for escape routes, for anything that might save him from the consequences of his own actions. He found nothing but the blank stares of people who had finally seen him for what he really was. This isn't over, he muttered, but the words had no power behind them. He was already reaching for his jacket, already backing toward the door, already becoming just another story they'd tell about the night Justice actually showed up at Rose's diner. As the door chimed behind Derek's retreating figure, the diner fell quiet except for the eternal hum of the refrigeration units and the distant sound of traffic. Tommy, David, and Zara stood in the fluorescent-lit space, processing what had just happened. Well, Tommy said finally, breaking the silence. That was something. David turned back to Zara, and she realized they weren't done yet. The confrontation with Derek had been just the beginning. Now came the harder part. Figuring out what happened next between two people from completely different worlds who had just witnessed something neither of them would ever forget. About that dinner, David said quietly. And Zara realized that her answer would determine whether this night was just a brief interruption in her ordinary life, or the beginning of something she'd never dared to imagine. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and uncertainty. Zara found herself studying David's face in the harsh fluorescent light, searching for clues about his true intentions. In her experience, wealthy men who asked working women to dinner usually had expectations that came with strings attached, strings she couldn't afford to tangle herself in. I should get home, she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. My mother will be wondering where I am. Of course, David replied, but something in his tone made her pause. There was disappointment there, yes, but also understanding. Can I at least give you a ride? It's the least I can do after everything you've been through tonight. Tommy cleared his throat from behind the counter. Zara, honey, before you go, your job is here whenever you want it back. With a raise. Derek's been skimming from the till anyway, so we'll have more budget now. Zara's throat tightened with emotion. Tommy, thank you. That means more than you know. It's what should have happened from the start, the older man replied gruffly. Take tomorrow off though. Lord knows you've earned it after tonight's drama. David seized the opening. Which brings us back to dinner tomorrow. I promise it's just dinner, Ms. Williams. No strings, no expectations. Just two people sharing a meal and maybe getting to know each other. Zara hesitated, torn between caution and something she was afraid to name. Why? She asked finally. Why is this important to you? The question seemed to catch David off guard. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, as if he was seeing something beyond the diner's cracked walls. Can I tell you something? He said finally. Something I haven't told anyone in a very long time. Zara nodded, though she wasn't sure why. David leaned against the counter, his expensive suit incongruous in the working-class diner. I grew up about 15 minutes from here, in an apartment building that was torn down to make room for condos I probably helped finance. My parents, my dad was a janitor, my mom cleaned houses for rich families in Manhattan. The revelation hit Zara like a physical blow. She'd assumed, like everyone always did, that wealth meant inherited privilege, that success was something passed down through generations like family silver. Every night, David continued, his voice soft with memory, my mom would come home and tell us stories about the houses she cleaned. Not gossip. She was too decent for that. But she described the art on the walls, the books in the libraries, the way the light fell through their enormous windows. She'd make it sound like fairy tales. Tommy had gone very still behind the counter, recognizing something universal in David's words, the particular ache of being close to a world you could see but not touch. She died last spring, David said, and Zara heard the crack in his voice despite his attempt to control it. Cancer. Even with all my money, all my resources, I couldn't save her. But before she died, she told me something I can't forget. He paused, seeming to gather himself. She said, Mijo, you've got everything those rich families had, the houses, the art, the windows. But you're living like a ghost in your own life. When was the last time you looked at someone and saw them, really saw them, instead of just what they could do for you? The question hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Zara felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared understanding she hadn't expected. Tonight, David continued, meeting her eyes directly, when you explained why you brought my wallet to Derek even though you knew he might not believe you, that's when I realized I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. You showed me what integrity looks like when it costs you everything. Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I just did what anyone should do. No, David said firmly. You did what you were raised to do, despite the cost. That's not the same thing at all. The truth of it settled between them like a bridge spanning two different worlds. Zara thought about her own mother, probably asleep in their small apartment, trusting that her daughter would continue to make choices that honored the values she'd instilled despite how hard those choices made life. My mama always said, Zara found herself saying, that character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's who you are when you think nobody's looking but God. David smiled, and for the first time all evening, it reached his eyes completely. Your mama sounds like she and mine would have gotten along. Probably would have, Zara agreed, then caught herself. She was letting her guard down, getting drawn into the warmth of shared understanding. That was dangerous. That was how hearts got broken. Tell me about her, David said. Your mother. Zara glanced at Tommy, who was pretending to busy himself with cleaning already clean counters while obviously listening to every word. The older man caught her look and smiled encouragingly. She raised me alone, Zara said slowly. My father left when I was 3. Said he wasn't ready for the responsibility. The old wound still ached, but distantly now, like a scar that only hurt when the weather changed. Mama worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, cleaned offices at night, worked at a laundromat during the day, took in sewing on weekends. She paused, remembering the sound of her mother's sewing machine running late into the night, the soft hymns she'd hum while working. She never complained, Zara continued. Never let me see her cry, though I know she must have. Every night, no matter how tired she was, she'd help me with my homework at the kitchen table. She'd say, baby girl, education is the only thing they can't take away from you once you earn it. Is that why you're taking classes? David asked gently. Zara looked surprised that he'd remembered that detail from their brief conversation outside. Medical billing certification. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work. Better than... She gestured around the diner. Better than this. I didn't mean, Tommy's been good to me. This place has been good to me. But Mama's getting older, and her arthritis is getting worse. She needs someone who can take care of her the way she took care of me. David nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. The classes must be expensive. Everything's expensive when you don't have anything, Zara replied with a bitter laugh. I've been saving for 2 years just to afford the textbooks. The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. David thought about the cash in his wallet, $347 that represented months of careful saving for Zara, but was less than he'd spent on lunch yesterday. The inequality of it was staggering, shameful. What if I told you, David said carefully, that I own a medical supply company? That we're always looking for qualified billing specialists? Zara's expression shuttered immediately. I don't want charity. It wouldn't be charity. It would be business. We pay well because we need people who are absolutely trustworthy with confidential patient information. People with integrity. He paused. People like you. You don't know me, Zara protested. You've known me for an hour. I know you returned a wallet full of cash when you could have walked away. I know you brought it to your manager even though you knew he might not believe you. I know you stood up to him when he accused you falsely. I know you got fired for doing the right thing and your first worry was how to explain it to your mother. David's voice was gaining strength, conviction. I know more about your character in 1 hour than I've learned about some people in years. Tommy cleared his throat softly. For what it's worth, he said, Zara's the most honest person I've ever employed. Girl found $50 someone dropped in the parking lot last month and stood out there for 2 hours trying to find who it belonged to. Tommy, Zara said, embarrassed. It's true, the older man insisted. You got integrity coming out your ears. Honey. Always have. David felt something click into place, a puzzle piece he hadn't realized was missing. This wasn't about guilt or charity or even attraction, though he was definitely attracted to her. This was about recognition, seeing in someone else the values his mother had tried to instill in him, the person she'd hoped he'd become. One dinner, he said again, his voice gentle but persistent. Just to say thank you properly. And to talk about that job, if you're interested. No pressure, no expectations beyond good food and honest conversation. Zara looked between David and Tommy, seeing encouragement in both their faces. The practical part of her mind was already calculating. A job in medical billing would pay 3 times what she made at the diner. It could mean better care for her mother, finishing school faster, maybe even saving enough for a small emergency fund. But the cautious part of her heart whispered warnings about getting involved with wealthy men who seemed too good to be true. That was a story that never ended well for women like her. Where? She asked finally, the word coming out before she'd fully decided to say it. Wherever you'd be comfortable, David replied immediately. Your choice entirely. Zara thought for a moment. There's a little Italian place about 6 blocks from here. Gino's. It's family-owned, been there forever. Good food, reasonable prices. David smiled. Gino's it is. 7 o'clock. 7:30, Zara countered, asserting some small measure of control over the situation. 7:30, David agreed. And Zara? Yes. Thank you. For tonight, for everything. I haven't felt this, awake, in a very long time. As they prepared to leave the diner, David to his waiting car, Zara to the bus stop, neither of them could have predicted that this chance encounter would reshape both their lives. They only knew that something had shifted between them, something fragile and precious and terrifying in its implications. The night air was cool against their faces as they stepped outside, carrying with it the promise of autumn and change. Behind them, Tommy locked up the diner, whistling softly to himself. It had been a good night after all, he thought. Justice served, truth revealed, and maybe, just maybe, 2 lonely people finding their way toward each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new possibilities. But tonight, for the first time in longer than either could remember, both David and Zara went to sleep with something they'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The next evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made promises feel possible. Zara had changed clothes 3 times in their small apartment, finally settling on her one good dress, a deep blue number she'd bought for her community college graduation ceremony 2 years ago. It was simple but elegant, and it made her feel like someone worthy of dining with a billionaire, even at a neighborhood Italian restaurant. Her mother, Elena, sat at the kitchen table watching her daughter's preparations with knowing eyes. At 58, Elena Williams had the kind of beauty that comes from a life lived with dignity despite hardship, silver threading through her dark hair, laugh lines earned through determination to find joy even in difficult circumstances. You're nervous, Elena observed, her voice carrying the slight accent of her Puerto Rican childhood. I'm not nervous, Zara lied, fumbling with her earrings for the third time. It's just dinner. A thank you dinner. Ham. Elena's tone suggested she wasn't buying it. And this thank you dinner, it's with a man who got you your job back. Among other things. Zara caught her mother's eye in the hallway mirror. Mama, what if this is a mistake? What if I'm reading this all wrong? Elena rose from her chair with the careful movements of someone whose joints protested after long days, but her expression was soft with understanding. Mija, come here. Zara turned, and Elena cupped her daughter's face in hands that bore the calluses of decades of hard work. You know what your abuela used to tell me when I was scared to hope for something good? What? She'd say, Elena, God doesn't give us more than we can handle, but He also doesn't give us less than we deserve. When something good comes your way, don't insult God by assuming it's a mistake. Zara felt tears prick her eyes. But what if? What if, nothing? Elena's voice was firm now, carrying the authority of a woman who'd raised a daughter alone and done it well. You are intelligent, beautiful, kind, and honest. Any man would be lucky to know you. Don't you dare walk into that restaurant thinking you don't belong there. Zara hugged her mother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender soap and the faint traces of the medicinal cream she used for her arthritis. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby girl. Now go. And don't come home too early. I want to hear all about it tomorrow. 20 minutes later, Zara stood outside Gino's, smoothing her dress and trying to calm her racing heart. Through the window, she could see David already seated at a corner table, looking somehow both perfectly at ease and slightly nervous himself. He traded his business suit for dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than her rent, but the effect was more approachable, more real. The moment she walked through the door, their eyes met, and David's face lit up with a smile that seemed to reach all the way to his soul. He stood immediately, and Zara was struck again by his presence, not just his height or his obvious success, but something deeper. A quality of attention that made her feel like the only person in the room. You look beautiful, he said as she approached, and the simple honesty of it made her cheeks warm. Thank you, she replied, allowing him to pull out her chair. You clean up pretty well yourself. The restaurant was exactly as she described, family-owned, comfortable, filled with the kind of warmth that came from 3 generations of Italians treating every customer like extended family. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades. The tables were mismatched but polished to a shine, and the air was rich with the scent of garlic and fresh herbs. This place is perfect, David said, looking around with genuine appreciation. How long have you been coming here? Since I was a kid. Mama and I used to come here on special occasions, my birthday, when I made honor roll, that sort of thing. Mr. Gino always remembered our order. Zara's expression softened with memory. When Mama was working 3 jobs and I was doing homework at that table by the window most nights, Mrs. Gino would bring me hot chocolate and tell me stories about Italy. David followed her gaze to the small table by the window, picturing a younger Zara bent over textbooks while the restaurant bustled around her. The image stirred something protective in his chest. They helped raise you, he observed. Half the neighborhood helped raise me, Zara replied with a smile. Mama always said it takes a village, and we had a good village. As if summoned by her words, an elderly man with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands appeared at their table. Zara. Bella M.A. Where have you been? We haven't seen you in months. Mr. Gino. Zara stood to embrace the old man, her face lighting up with genuine affection. I've been working doubles at the diner, trying to save money for school. Always working, this one, Gino said to David with paternal pride. Since she was small, always studying, always trying to make her mama proud. And you must be the young man she mentioned on the phone. David rose to shake Gino's hand, noting the way the older man's eyes assessed him with the protective instincts of a surrogate father. David Chen. Thank you for accommodating us on such short notice. Any friend of Zara's, Gino said simply. Now, you let me take care of dinner tonight. I make you something special, yes. After Gino disappeared back into the kitchen with promises of culinary magic, David and Zara settled into their seats, the initial nervousness giving way to something more comfortable. He seems to think highly of you, David observed. The Ginos are good people. When Mama got sick a few years ago, just a bad flu, but she couldn't work for 2 weeks, they sent food home with me every night. Wouldn't take no for an answer. And when you tried to pay them back? Zara's smile was rueful. Mrs. Gino said, Bella, you pay us back by becoming the woman we know you can be. That's payment enough. David felt something twist in his chest at the casual generosity of it, the way this community had woven itself around Zara and her mother like a safety net made of human kindness. His own world seemed cold and transactional by comparison. Tell me about your world, Zara said, as if reading his thoughts. What's it like, running a company? David was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer honestly without sounding either boastful or self-pitying. Lonely, he said finally. More lonely than I expected it to be. But you must have friends, colleagues, people you trust. I have people who work for me, people who want things from me, people who tell me what they think I want to hear. David's smile was wry. It's different. Zara studied his face, seeing something vulnerable beneath the successful exterior. When was the last time someone disagreed with you? Really disagreed with you? The question caught David off guard. Last night, he said after a moment. When you told me I couldn't fix things just because I had money. And how did that feel? Refreshing, David admitted with a laugh. Terrifying, but refreshing. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of wine, a bottle David hadn't ordered but that Gino had selected personally, followed by a parade of dishes that showcased 3 generations of family recipes. As they ate, their conversation flowed with surprising ease, moving from childhood memories to dreams for the future, from fears to hopes to the kind of philosophical questions that only emerge when 2 people feel safe enough to be truly honest with each other. Can I ask you something personal? David said as they shared a dessert of tiramisu that Mrs. Gino had insisted they try. You can ask, Zara replied carefully. I might not answer. Fair enough. David set down his fork, his expression growing serious. What would you do if money wasn't a factor? If you could do anything, be anything, what would make you happy? Zara was quiet for a long moment, the question stirring dreams she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten they existed. I wanted to be a nurse, she said finally. When I was little, that's all I ever wanted to be. I used to bandage my dolls, pretend I was taking care of sick people, making them better. What happened to that dream? Life happened. Nursing school is expensive, and someone had to take care of Mama. The medical billing program is shorter, cheaper, more practical. She paused, then looked at him directly. Why do you ask? Because I've spent the last 10 years building something I'm not sure I even want anymore, David said quietly. And tonight, listening to you talk about your mother, about this neighborhood, about doing the right thing even when it costs you everything, I realize I've forgotten what it feels like to want something that matters. Your company doesn't matter. My company makes money. That's not the same thing as mattering. Zara reached across the table and touched his hand gently, the gesture so natural it seemed to surprise them both. Maybe the question isn't what your company does, she said softly. Maybe it's what you do with what your company gives you. David looked down at her hand covering his, marveling at the way such a simple touch could feel like an anchor in a storm he didn't know he'd been weathering. I have a confession, he said. What? I've never felt more myself than I have in the last 24 hours. Since I met you. Zara felt her heart skip, but also felt the familiar voice of caution whispering warnings. David. I know, he said quickly. I know this is crazy. I know we barely know each other. I know we come from completely different worlds. But I also know that when I watched Derek try to destroy your life for doing the right thing, something in me woke up that's been asleep for years. What if you're wrong about me? Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I'm not who you think I am? What if you're wrong about me? David countered. What if this isn't about money or pity or guilt? What if it's just about 2 people who recognize something real in each other? The question hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross but neither could ignore. Around them, the restaurant continued its gentle evening rhythm, families sharing meals, couples celebrating anniversaries, the timeless dance of human connection that had played out in this space for decades. I'm scared, Zara admitted, the words coming out before she could stop them. So am I, David replied. But maybe that means it's worth being scared about. As the evening wound down and David walked Zara to the bus stop despite her protests that he didn't need to, both of them knew that something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer strangers brought together by chance. They were two people who had chosen to see each other clearly and had discovered something worth nurturing in that seeing. "Thank you for tonight," Zara said as her bus approached, its headlights cutting through the autumn darkness. "Thank you for saying yes," David replied. "Can I see you again?" Zara smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a smile unclouded by caution or calculation. "I'd like that." As the bus pulled away, David stood on the sidewalk watching its taillights disappear into the night, feeling like a man who had just discovered he'd been holding his breath for years and could finally exhale. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about how two people from such different worlds could build something lasting together. But tonight, for both of them, hope felt less like a luxury and more like a promise waiting to be kept. 3 weeks had passed since that first dinner at Gino's, and what had begun as a single evening had blossomed into something neither David nor Zara had quite dared to name. They'd fallen into a rhythm: quiet dinners at neighborhood places Zara knew, long walks through parts of the city David had never explored despite living there his entire adult life, conversations that stretched late into the evening until Zara reluctantly caught the last bus home. David had been true to his word about the job opportunity, connecting Zara with the hiring manager at his medical supply company. The interview had gone well, better than well, and she was set to start the following Monday with a salary that would triple her income from the diner. For the first time in her adult life, Zara had allowed herself to dream beyond mere survival. But tonight felt different. David had asked her to meet him at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan, a place with crisp white tablecloths and a wine list that probably cost more than most people's rent. When she'd hesitated, he'd insisted it was a celebration. Her new job, her bright future, whatever this was becoming between them. Zara had borrowed a dress from her neighbor and spent her tip money on a taxi, telling herself that one night of feeling like she belonged in David's world wouldn't hurt. But as she walked through the restaurant's gleaming entrance, past tables filled with people who moved through wealth like they were born to it, she felt the familiar weight of being somewhere she didn't belong. David was already seated at a prime table near the window, looking perfectly at home in his tailored suit and expensive watch. When he saw her, his face lit up with that smile she'd grown to treasure, but something felt off. There was a tension around his eyes, a tightness in his jaw that hadn't been there during their quiet dinners at family-owned places where she felt safe. "You look incredible," he said as she sat down, but even his compliment felt different here, more performative somehow, as if they were playing roles instead of simply being themselves. "This place is..." Zara looked around, taking in the crystal glasses and the soft murmur of conversations conducted in the language of inherited privilege. "It's beautiful." "I wanted tonight to be special," David said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I have something to tell you." Before Zara could respond, their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at a nearby table. A woman's voice, sharp with alcohol and entitled indignation, cut through the restaurant's refined atmosphere. "Excuse me, but I think there's been some mistake." Zara looked up to see a blonde woman in her 30s approaching their table, her designer dress and perfectly applied makeup unable to disguise the cruel curve of her smile. Behind her trailed a man in an expensive suit who looked deeply uncomfortable with whatever was about to unfold. "Vivian," David's voice was carefully neutral, but Zara caught the way his hand tightened around hers. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight." Obviously, Vivian's eyes flicked to Zara with the kind of dismissive assessment that stripped away dignity in a single glance. "I can see you're branching out in your social circle these days." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, wrapped in enough politeness to maintain plausible deniability while ensuring its target felt every inch of the blade. Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Vivian, this is Zara Williams," David said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Zara, this is Vivian Ashworth. We used to know each other." "Oh, we did more than know each other," Vivian laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "We were engaged for 2 years, darling. I'm sure you remember. It was in all the society pages." Zara felt the world tilt slightly. David had mentioned past relationships in vague terms, but the word engaged hit her like a physical blow. She looked at David, searching his face for some explanation, some context that would make this make sense. "That was a long time ago," David said quietly, not meeting Zara's eyes. "Not that long," Vivian corrected with poisonous sweetness. "What's it been? 8 months since you called it off. I have to say, your taste has certainly evolved since then." The man with Vivian, her date, presumably, tugged at her arm. Viv, maybe we should just. No, Richard, I think this is fascinating. Vivian shook him off, her attention laser-focused on the tableau before her. David, I have to ask, is this some kind of charity case? Are you having one of your guilt phases about growing up poor? Because honestly, darling, there are more appropriate ways to give back to the community. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Every fear Zara had harbored about this relationship, every doubt she'd pushed aside, came rushing back in a torrent of shame and humiliation. She was charity. She was a guilt phase. She was David's way of assuaging his conscience about his privileged life. That's enough. David's voice was low and dangerous, but the damage was already done. Is it though? Vivian's smile widened. I mean, look at her, David. She's lovely, I'm sure, in a very authentic way. But let's be realistic about what this is. You're a billionaire tech mogul. She's a waitress from Queens. This isn't Pretty Woman, darling, this is real life, and real life has consequences. Zara found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. I think I should go. Zara, no, David reached for her hand, but she was already standing, her chair scraping against the polished floor. Please don't, she said quietly, her dignity intact despite the tears threatening to spill over. This was a mistake. I should have known better. You see. Vivian addressed David as if Zara had already disappeared. She knows her place. I have to give her credit for that. David stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. Vivian, you have no right. I have every right, Vivian snapped, her own facade finally cracking to reveal the bitter woman underneath. Do you have any idea what it was like watching you throw away everything we built together? 2 years, David. 2 years of my life wasted while you decided you weren't ready for commitment. And now, 8 months later, you're playing house with some girl you picked up at a diner. It's not like that, David said, but his words felt hollow even to him. Isn't it? Vivian's laugh was sharp with hurt and fury. You left me because you said you weren't capable of real intimacy, that your success had made you too closed off to love anyone properly. And yet here you are, apparently transformed by the healing power of poverty tourism. Each word was a scalpel cutting deeper, exposing the infected wounds of David's past while simultaneously destroying any chance Zara might have had of believing their relationship was real. Zara had heard enough. She turned and walked toward the exit with as much dignity as she could muster, aware that every eye in the restaurant was following her progress. Behind her, she could hear David calling her name, but she didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. The cool night air hit her face like a slap as she emerged onto the sidewalk, but it couldn't wash away the burning shame that consumed her. She'd been such a fool. Such a naive, hopeful fool to think that someone like David Chen could see past her circumstances to who she really was. Zara, wait. David's voice came from behind her, breathless from chasing her down the street. She turned to face him, and he was struck by the way the streetlight illuminated the tears on her cheeks, the way her composure was holding by the thinnest of threads. Is it true? She asked quietly. Were you engaged to her? David's hesitation was answer enough, but he tried anyway. Yes, but 8 months ago. Zara, it's not what you think. What I think, Zara said, her voice gaining strength from anger, is that I've been exactly what she said I was. A charity case. A way for you to feel better about your privileged life. A guilt phase. That's not true, David said desperately. What we have is real. Is it? Zara's voice cracked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you met a poor black girl who did you a favor, and you decided she'd make an interesting project. A way to prove to yourself that you're still the good guy despite all your money. You're wrong, David said, reaching for her again. You have to know you're wrong. Do I? Zara stepped back, putting distance between them. Tell me something, David. In all these weeks we've been seeing each other, have you introduced me to anyone from your world? Your friends? Your colleagues? Anyone? David's silence was damning. Have you taken me anywhere that your ex-fiancé might see us? Anywhere that matters in your real life? I was trying to protect you, David started. From what? From your real life? From the world you actually live in? Zara's laugh was bitter. Or were you protecting yourself from having to explain what you were doing with someone like me? That's not fair. Fair. Zara's composure finally cracked. Fair would have been you telling me about Vivian before I had to hear it from her in front of a restaurant full of people. Fair would have been you being honest about what this was instead of letting me believe it was something it could never be. David felt everything he'd built with Zara crumbling around him, and he was powerless to stop it. Every word she spoke was a truth he'd been too cowardly to face, every accusation a wound he'd inflicted through his own willful blindness. "I love you," he said desperately, the words coming out like a prayer. Zara's face crumpled for just a moment before hardening into something that looked like pity. "No, you don't. You love the idea of me. You love the way I make you feel about yourself. But you don't love me enough to fight for me when it matters. You don't love me enough to be proud of me in front of people who matter to you. Zara, please. Don't," she said firmly. "Don't make this harder than it already is. We both know this was never going to work. People like us, we don't get fairy tale endings." She turned and walked away, leaving David standing alone on the sidewalk with the wreckage of his own making scattered around him. He wanted to chase after her, wanted to fight for what they'd built together, but Vivian's words echoed in his head alongside Zara's accusations, and he realized with devastating clarity that maybe they were both right. Maybe he had been using Zara to fill a void in his own life without considering the cost to hers. Maybe he had been too cowardly to integrate her into his world because some part of him had always known it wouldn't last. Maybe the love he felt for her was real, but not strong enough to overcome the barriers he'd been too privileged to see clearly. As Zara's figure disappeared into the crowd, David Chen, billionaire, successful entrepreneur, master of his universe, had never felt more powerless or alone. He'd had everything he thought he wanted, and he'd thrown it away because he'd been too afraid to fight for something that mattered more than money or status or the approval of people who would never truly know him. The worst part wasn't that he'd lost her. The worst part was that she was probably right to leave. David stood motionless on the sidewalk for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, watching the spot where Zara had disappeared into the crowd. The city moved around him, taxis honking, people laughing as they emerged from restaurants, the endless pulse of New York nightlife. But he felt separate from all of it, trapped in a bubble of his own making. His phone buzzed. A text from his driver asking if he needed pickup. Another from his assistant about tomorrow's board meeting. The mechanical demands of his perfectly organized life, waiting to pull him back into the comfortable numbness he'd mistaken for success. Instead of responding, David found himself walking. Not toward his penthouse or his office or any of the spaces that defined his public identity, but deeper into the city, through neighborhoods that reminded him uncomfortably of the one where he'd grown up. Where authenticity wasn't a luxury but a necessity, and where people like Zara Williams built lives of dignity despite circumstances that would have broken lesser spirits. 20 minutes later, he found himself standing outside Rose's diner. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting pink shadows across the empty parking lot. Through the windows, he could see Tommy inside, methodically cleaning the same counters he'd wiped down thousands of times before, his movements carrying the rhythm of honest work honestly done. David pushed through the door, the familiar chime announcing his arrival. Tommy looked up, surprise and something that might have been disappointment flickering across his weathered face. "We're closed," Tommy said quietly, but he didn't stop cleaning. "I know," David replied, suddenly uncertain why he'd come. I needed somewhere to think." Tommy studied him for a long moment, taking in the expensive suit, the haunted expression, the way David's hand shook slightly as he ran them through his hair. "You look like a man who just made the biggest mistake of his life," Tommy observed. David's laugh was hollow. "Something like that." "Coffee." David nodded gratefully. Tommy moved with practiced efficiency, the ritual of brewing coffee giving both men something to focus on besides the weight of unspoken truths. "She's not coming back, is she?" David said finally, accepting the steaming mug with hands that still weren't quite steady. "That depends," Tommy replied, settling onto a stool across the counter from David. "On whether you're the man she thought you were, or the man you've been pretending to be." The words hit harder than any accusation Vivian had hurled. "What's the difference? The man she thought you were would be fighting for her right now instead of sitting in a diner feeling sorry for himself." David flinched. "You don't understand the situation." "Don't I?" Tommy's voice was sharp with decades of accumulated wisdom. "Boy, I've been watching people make excuses for not doing the right thing for 62 years. I know what cowardice looks like, even when it's wearing a $1,000 suit. It's not that simple. There are complications, social differences, Expectations. Whose expectations? Tommy interrupted. Yours? Or people who don't give a damn about your happiness? David stared into his coffee, seeing his own reflection distorted in the dark surface. She thinks I was using her. That she was just some kind of charity case to make me feel better about my privileged life. Were you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. David wanted to deny it immediately, but Tommy's steady gaze demanded honesty. Maybe at first, David admitted quietly. Maybe I was drawn to her because she represented something I thought I'd lost. Authenticity. Genuine goodness. But Tommy, what I feel for her now, it's real. It's the most real thing I've felt in years. And what are you doing about it? What can I do? She's right about everything. I never introduced her to my world because I was protecting myself, not her. I let that woman tonight humiliate her because I was too shocked to react fast enough. I failed her when she needed me most. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his gnarled fingers wrapped around his own coffee mug. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-earned experience. You know what the difference is between a good man and a great man. David looked up, waiting. A good man tries not to make mistakes. A great man owns his mistakes and fights to fix them, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She won't even talk to me now. Did you try? David realized with shame that he hadn't. After watching Zara walk away, he'd stood on that sidewalk paralyzed by his own sense of failure instead of fighting for what mattered most. I don't know how, he admitted. I don't know how to fix this. Tommy smiled for the first time since David had entered the diner. Start with the truth. All of it. Then show her, don't tell her, show her, that she matters more than your fear. What if it's too late? What if it's not? David felt something shift in his chest, fear giving way to a different kind of terror, the kind that came with choosing to be vulnerable, to fight for something with no guarantee of winning. She starts her new job Monday, David said suddenly. The job you got her. That she earned. I just made the introduction. David's voice was gaining strength, conviction. She's going to be amazing at it. She's going to transform people's lives just by being exactly who she is. And you're going to what? Hide in your penthouse and pretend you never met her. David looked at Tommy, really looked at him. This man who had built something lasting and meaningful with his hands and his heart, who had loved his wife Rose for 32 years, who saw Zara's worth immediately and without question. No, David said quietly. No, I'm not. Then what are you going to do? David pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he needed. His hands were steadier now, purpose replacing paralysis. I'm going to tell the truth, he said, pressing dial. Starting with the people who matter most. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. David? It's almost midnight. Is everything okay? Dad, David said, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. I need to ask you something. When you knew Mom was the one, when you knew you wanted to spend your life with her, were you scared? There was a pause, and David could picture his father in the small apartment in Queens, probably sitting at the same kitchen table where David had done homework 25 years ago. Terrified, his father said softly. Your mother was out of my league in every way that mattered. Beautiful, smart, kind, she could have had anyone. I was just a janitor who'd fallen in love with a woman who deserved the world. But you fought for her anyway. I fought for her because I loved her. And because I realized that being worthy of someone isn't about what you have or what you can give them. It's about being brave enough to be completely honest about who you are and what you feel. David closed his eyes, hearing his mother's voice in his father's words. I think I found her, Dad. I found the woman I want to spend my life with. And I think I just lost her because I was too afraid to be honest. Then stop being afraid, son. You didn't get where you are by accepting defeat the first time something got difficult. This is different. This is the only thing that matters, his father interrupted gently. Everything else, the company, the money, the success, it's all just noise. Love is the only thing that's real. David felt tears he hadn't shed since his mother's funeral begin to blur his vision. What if she won't forgive me? Then at least you'll know you tried. But David? If she's the woman you say she is, if she's anything like your mother was, she's not going to make it easy for you. You're going to have to prove that you mean it. Not with money or grand gestures, but with consistency. With showing up, day after day, until she believes that you see her the way she deserves to be seen. After hanging up, David sat in the quiet diner with Tommy, both men lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the city continued its restless dance, but inside the fluorescent-lit space that had witnessed so much human drama, two men contemplated the difference between success and significance. "I have an idea," David said finally, "but I'm going to need help." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "What kind of help?" "The kind that comes from people who've known Zara longer than 3 weeks and love her enough to want her to be happy." Tommy's smile was slow but genuine. "I think I know some people who might be interested in that project." David felt hope stirring in his chest for the first time since Zara had walked away from him on that sidewalk. It wouldn't be easy. It might not work. But for the first time in his adult life, he was going to fight for something that couldn't be bought, sold, or negotiated in a boardroom. He was going to fight for love. The plan that began forming in his mind that night wasn't grand or dramatic. It was simple, honest, and terrifying in its vulnerability. It would require him to be the man Zara had believed him to be rather than the man he'd been pretending to be. Most importantly, it would require him to show her, with actions rather than words, that she wasn't a charity case or a guilt phase or a temporary diversion from his real life. She was his real life. Everything else was just details. As David finally left the diner and walked into the uncertain night, he carried with him the kind of clarity that only comes from losing something precious and deciding to fight to get it back. Tomorrow would bring the hardest conversation of his life, followed by weeks or months of proving that love was more than just a feeling. It was a choice he was prepared to make every single day. The question was whether Zara would give him the chance to prove it. Monday morning arrived grey and drizzly, the kind of October weather that made promises feel fragile and hope seem like a luxury Zara couldn't afford. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her new blouse, another purchase she couldn't really afford but had deemed necessary for her first day at Chen Medical Solutions. The irony wasn't lost on her. Even in leaving David behind, she couldn't escape him entirely. His company would pay her salary, his recommendation had secured her position, and his presence would linger in every corner of this new life she was trying to build from the wreckage of her broken heart. "You look professional," her mother said from the doorway, but Elena's eyes were shadowed with concern. She'd watched her daughter retreat into herself over the past week, had seen the way Zara's smiles never quite reached her eyes anymore. "Professional is the goal," Zara replied, forcing brightness into her voice. "This job is going to change everything for us, Mama. Better insurance, steady income, maybe even enough to start saving for that little house with the garden you always wanted." Elena stepped forward, placing her hands on her daughter's shoulders. "Mija, what good is a garden if the person tending it has forgotten how to bloom?" The question hit deeper than Zara expected, but she pushed the emotion aside. She'd spent the last week building walls around her heart, and she wasn't about to let them crumble now. "I'm fine, Mama. Sometimes things don't work out the way we hope, but we adapt. We survive. We move forward. And sometimes," Elena said gently, "we run away from the very thing that might save us." Before Zara could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Good luck today, kiddo. You're going to be amazing. P.S. Stop by the diner after work if you can. Got something for you." The message brought the first genuine smile to Zara's face in days. Whatever else had fallen apart, she still had her chosen family, the people who had known her worth long before David Chen had walked into her life. An hour later, Zara stood in the sleek lobby of Chen Medical Solutions, her reflection multiplied in the polished surfaces around her. The building was everything she'd expected, modern, expensive, intimidating in its perfection. She was early, as always, but her nerves had made sitting at home impossible. "Ms. Williams." A warm voice drew her attention. A woman in her 50s approached with an extended hand and a genuine smile. "I'm Margaret Foster, Head of Human Resources. We spoke on the phone." "Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity," Zara replied, grateful for Margaret's immediate warmth. "Oh, the opportunity is all ours," Margaret said, leading Zara toward the elevators. "Your interview was one of the most impressive I've conducted in 20 years. The way you talked about patient care, about the human element in medical billing, it was exactly what we've been looking for." As they rode up to the 10th floor, Margaret continued chatting about company culture, benefits, and the team Zara would be joining. But Zara found herself only half listening, her mind occupied with the question of whether she might run into David in these halls, and what she would say if she did. "I should mention," Margaret said as they stepped off the elevator, "Mr. Chen specifically asked me to tell you that he hopes you'll be very happy here, and that if you need anything at all, you should feel free to reach out." Zara's stomach tightened. Will I be working directly with him? "Oh no," Margaret laughed. "Mr. Chen runs the tech side of the company. Medical billing operates pretty independently. To be honest, most of our staff rarely see him except at the annual company picnic." Relief and disappointment warred in Zara's chest as Margaret led her to a bright, modern office space filled with natural light and the quiet hum of focused work. Her cubicle was near a window overlooking the city, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine building a life in this space. Professional, stable, uncomplicated. The morning passed in a blur of orientation materials, system passwords, and introductions to colleagues who seemed genuinely pleased to welcome her to the team. By lunch, Zara was beginning to think she might actually be able to do this, to build a new life that had nothing to do with broken hearts or impossible dreams. She was eating a sandwich at her desk when Margaret appeared with a small package. "This arrived for you this morning," she said with a curious smile. "Personal delivery." Zara's hands trembled slightly as she recognized the elegant handwriting on the envelope. Inside, she found a small jewelry box and a note written in David's precise script. Zara, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now, but I need you to know that everything I told you was true. You aren't charity or a guilt phase or a project. You're the woman who woke me up to who I could be instead of who I'd settled for being. I also need you to know that you were right about everything else. I was a coward. I protected myself instead of protecting us. I let fear make my choices instead of love. I can't take back that night at the restaurant, but I can tell you the truth I should have told you weeks ago. The bracelet in this box belonged to my mother. It was the only piece of jewelry she ever owned that wasn't from a pawn shop or a discount store. My father saved for 6 months to buy it for her on their first anniversary. She wore it every day until she died. She always said that someday, I should give it to a woman who understood that love isn't about what you can afford to give someone. It's about what you can't afford to lose. I can't afford to lose you, Zara. I won't insult you by asking for another chance I haven't earned. But I needed you to know that loving you wasn't a mistake or a phase. It was the first real thing I've felt in my adult life. If you decide you can forgive me, not today, maybe not soon, but someday, I'll be waiting. However long it takes. David *. Zara's hands shook as she opened the jewelry box, revealing a simple silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a heart. It was beautiful not because of its monetary value, but because of what it represented, a love that had lasted 35 years, built on mutual respect and shared dreams rather than wealth or status. Tears she'd been holding back all week finally spilled over, carrying with them the weight of her own stubborn pride and fear. She thought about her mother's words that morning, about gardens and blooming, and realized that maybe running away from love wasn't strength, maybe it was just another kind of cowardice. Her phone rang, making her jump. Tommy's number appeared on the screen. "Hey, kiddo, how's the first day going?" "It's..." Zara's voice cracked. "Tommy, I think I made a terrible mistake. About the job. About David. About everything." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "You want to tell me about it?" Through tears and halting words, Zara told him about the bracelet, about David's letter, about the way her heart had recognized something true in his words despite all the walls she'd built around it. "So the question is," Tommy said gently when she'd finished, "what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know. What if it's too late? What if he's already moved on?" "Honey," Tommy's voice was warm with something that sounded like conspiracy, "trust me when I tell you that boy hasn't moved on. In fact, why don't you come by the diner after work? I think you might be surprised by what you find." Something in Tommy's tone made Zara's heart skip. "Tommy, what did you do?" "Nothing much. Just had a conversation with a young man who reminded me a lot of myself when I was trying to win Rose back after our first big fight." "What do you mean, win her back?" Tommy chuckled. "Did I never tell you that story? Rose broke up with me 3 months after we started dating. Said I was too stubborn and too proud to ever make a good husband. Took me 2 months of showing up at her job every day with coffee and an apology before she agreed to give me another chance. Every day. Every single day. Sometimes love requires a grand gesture, Zara. But more often, it just requires showing up consistently until the other person believes you mean it." What's the most romantic gesture someone has ever made for you, or that you've made for someone else? Sometimes the simplest acts of consistency mean more than the grandest displays. Share your love story moments below. Zara left work early, her supervisor understanding when she explained she had a family emergency. In a way, it was true. Her heart felt like it was in crisis, torn between the safety of solitude and the terrifying possibility of second chances. The late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds as she approached Rose's diner, casting everything in golden light that made promises feel possible again. But as she got closer, she noticed something different. The parking lot was full, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. Through the windows, she could see people moving around inside, not just Tommy, but what looked like half the neighborhood. Confused, Zara pushed through the door and stopped dead in her tracks. The diner had been transformed. Every table was filled with faces she recognized: Mr. and Mrs. Gino, her neighbors from the apartment building, her former classmates from community college, even Margaret from her new job. In the center of it all, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of his usual expensive suits, stood David. He looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure, his hands clasped tightly in front of him as he met her eyes across the crowded room. "What is this?" Zara whispered, though her heart was already providing the answer. Tommy stepped forward with a grin that threatened to split his face in half. "This, sweetheart, is what it looks like when a man realizes what really matters." David moved toward her slowly, as if afraid she might bolt. When he reached her, he spoke just loud enough for her to hear over the expectant silence of their audience. "You said I never introduced you to my world," he said quietly. "You were right. But that's because I was looking at it all wrong. This is my world, Zara. These people, your people, who love you and believe in you and want you to be happy. This is the only world that matters." He gestured around the room, and Zara saw the faces of her chosen family looking back at her with expressions of love and encouragement. "I spent the last week talking to everyone who matters to you," David continued. "I told them about us, about how I'd failed you, about how much I love you and how desperately I want the chance to prove it. And you know what they told me?" Zara shook her head, not trusting her voice. "They told me that you're worth fighting for. That love isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to grow, to change, to become the person worthy of someone as extraordinary as you." His voice cracked slightly. "They also told me that if I ever hurt you again, Tommy has a very sharp knife and knows how to use it." Despite herself, Zara laughed, tears streaming down her face. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know this is crazy. I know it's too soon. And I know I have a lot to prove. But Zara, I also know that I don't want to spend another day of my life without you in it." He dropped to one knee in the middle of Rose's diner, surrounded by the people who had helped shape the woman he loved, and opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "Zara Williams, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you that you're not my charity case or my redemption arc? You're my everything." The diner erupted in cheers and applause, but Zara heard none of it. Her world had narrowed to David's face, to the love shining in his eyes, to the promise of a future she'd never dared to imagine. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As David slipped the ring onto her finger, as their friends and family surrounded them with hugs and tears and laughter, Zara realized that her mother had been right. Sometimes the very thing that might save us is the thing we run away from out of fear. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, love follows us home and gives us a second chance to choose courage over fear, hope over safety, and the terrifying beauty of forever over the loneliness of self-protection. 6 months later, David and Zara were married in a small ceremony at Rose's diner, surrounded by the people who had witnessed their love story from the beginning. Tommy walked Zara down the aisle, Elena cried tears of joy, and even the Ginos provided the catering with their famous family recipes. David kept his promise. He showed up every day, in small ways and large ones, proving that love was indeed a choice he was prepared to make over and over again. He funded a scholarship program for working students at the local community college. He moved his office to the neighborhood, creating jobs for local residents. Most importantly, he built a life with Zara that honored both their worlds while creating something entirely new together. And sometimes, when they walked past the spot where they'd first met, Zara would grip David's hand a little tighter and whisper a quiet thank you to the universe for the lost wallet, the wrongful accusation, and the 5 minutes that changed everything. Because sometimes justice does show up when you least expect it, wearing an expensive suit and carrying the power to rewrite your entire life story. Sometimes love really does conquer all.